Okay, so in this mock exercise, we're going to take a look at a case called Applewood Electronics, and we're going to actually go through activity-based costing and activity-based management. So what is activity-based costing? So before we actually go into the question, let's take a look at the basic concepts. So activity-based costing is one of the best tools for refining the existing traditional costing method. If you look at the previous mock exercises we've done, you'll see that we've used traditional allocation methodologies of allocating manufacturing overhead to a particular job, and we saw those job question that we did in previous mock exercise. And you'll see that we used either direct labor hours, machine hours, and we sometimes use percentage of direct labor. And what we do is we actually allocate it in the basis in which they consume a particular job or a particular product consumes that cost driver. In this case, what we're trying to do is modify and make it better in the way we allocate these overhead costs. And how we do that is based on activities. So we actually create cost objects and we use activity as a function of cost object. So what an activity is basically a task, event, or unit of work with a specific purpose. So activity could be packaging. So if you have 4 different products, and let's say product 1 requires only very little packaging material, but product 4 requires quite a lot of packaging because it's a much more delicate product to ship to our customers, then when we use activity-based costing, we're going to allocate a significant portion of the cost of packaging activity in that department with all the materials and the labor cost, all of that, we're going to probably determine how much to allocate to product number 4 because it requires, let's say, more packaging material. That's what we're really trying to do. And we're trying to determine what's the true cost of a particular product or a particular service, or perhaps a particular customer, how expensive is maintaining this particular customer. So that's what we're trying to do here. So activities would be packaging as an example, the packaging department, which has materials and labor in it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to determine the total cost of providing that activity. And then, of course, we're going to try to allocate it the best way we can to a particular product. Now, in a traditional costing basis, what we would do is we would take the number of units of product A, B, and C, and we're going to treat them equally, and then we're going to allocate the packaging department based on a traditional method of number of units, for example. And we'll know that's unfair because, as in this example, product 4 requires much more packaging, much more handling, much more labor component to the packaging of this material because it's a much more delicate product. And that's why activity-based costing is a much powerful way for us to allocate these costs. Now, when we do activity-based costing, there are essentially 7 steps in implementing the activity-based costing. The first step is we're going to identify the cost object. Okay, so the cost object would be product 1, product 2, product 3, product 4, let's say, in that example. Then we add step 2, identify the direct cost of the cost object. So in that case, it would be materials, labor, etc. And then the third step is really what's new under ABC. So this is like the ABC piece to it. So we need to identify and define activities and activity cost pools. We'll take a look at what that is in a minute. And then we're going to calculate the cost driver for each activity, and we're going to calculate the activity rate. So now we're going to calculate what is the cost per minute or per whatever driver that we decided to use for that particular activity. And then we're going to assign the indirect cost on a per activity basis to the cost object. And then we're going to add it to step 2, which is the direct cost of the cost object to determine the cost of selling or producing that product. Okay, so that's the 7th step of activity-based costing. When we talked about activity cost pools, we like to categorize these activity cost pools into 4 different categories. The first one is output unit level activity, and this one, again, is an example of that would be machinery, repairs and maintenance, depreciation, customer orders, and it has a function. In other words, the activity levels is a function of number of units and number of output. The other one is called batch level activity, and this is where the activity and how we allocate it is not necessarily based on output, but it's based on a batch. So for example, if you're reviewing or you're testing quality control of, let's say, your product, and it's through an assembly line, that testing mechanism would be a batch level, because we're not testing every output. We're testing perhaps 1,000 of the product, and we're pulling 3 or 4 of those 1,000 units to test it for quality control. That would be what we call batch level activity. Product or service sustaining level activity are anything to do with creating and making that product better. So it's going to benefit the entire product line, for example. That would be what we call product or service sustaining level activity. And finally, facility sustaining activity are any activities that relate to housing, the operations, building security, manufacturing facility, etc. Activities should only be combined within a level if they are highly correlated. So let's take a look at the steps 4 and 6. So I wanted just to highlight for you what actually happens in this typical example sample company. So in sample company, we have to determine the cost of a particular product. So in my example, we had 4 products. Product 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we know that with direct materials, direct labor, those are direct cost, and direct means we can specifically trace it to a product. So we know that certain materials relate to certain products, so that's why they're traced. So we definitely just allocate whatever costs or whatever usage of that direct material, direct labor into each individual product. Shipping is the same way as well, because we know that when we ship product A, the shipping cost may be 2 cents, and then product B may be 20 cents, and product D, the more complex one, may be $2 per unit or per item. And again, we know what those costs are. Now, the rest of these are what I call indirect costs. Indirect costs are costs that are difficult to trace to a particular cost object. Things like manufacturing overhead, building securities, insurance, utilities, or any of those overhead costs. What we do is we take that cost and we do what we call the first stage allocation under ABC. We're going to take that overhead cost. Now, we're going to look at what activities, and that's your first level of allocation. So different activities such as order size, customer orders, product design, customer relation, those are the activities in this particular example. Then we determine what is the driver for this activity. So in this case, it's machine hours. This one is number of orders. So the number of customer orders, we're going to look at how many items that the customer orders will determine how much to allocate to that particular activity. Product design and customer. Then what we do is we do a second level stage allocation by allocating these indirect costs further to the cost object. And the thing about ABC is that they have an unallocated, meaning they don't allocate all overhead costs to a particular cost object. So that's the difference. Now, traditional costing, as we saw in other mock exercises, we looked at the overhead, and we often use either machine hour or labor hours to allocate it to a particular product. And the second difference is that we allocate all to the product. We don't have an unallocated. Okay? So let's take a look at this question. Applewood. So here's the question. Okay, so Applewood makes 2 large screen high definition TVs, and there are 2 basically high definition models. The Monarch, which has been produced since 2010, sells for $900, so let's highlight that. And the Regal, so there's 2 products, Monarch and Regal. And let's like to write down here sales price, just make it easier for me to find it. And Regal was $1,140. That's the sales price. Okay. Now, Applewood CEO Harry suggested that the company concentrate its marketing resources on Regal and to begin to phase out Monarch. Applewood currently uses traditional costing. And the basis and the following cost information have been used as the basis of the pricing decision. So this is the traditional costing. That's what these are. Okay, so they used, so direct materials, direct labor, these are direct cost. And machine hours, okay, is 8 and 4, and this is number of units produced. Now, let's read some more. You'll see that the direct labor cost is $12 an hour. So that's an important number to note, because we're going to use that in a minute. And the machine usage cost is $18 per hour. Manufacturing overhead is estimated to be $4,800. And by the way, that $4.8 million is the same as this $4.8 million. Okay? And they were allocated using the machine hours. So this is a traditional costing method or allocation method using machine hours as the cost driver. So it's good to kind of make a marginal note to understand what exactly this question. Now, this is traditional. Now, a guy named Martin, the new company's controller, suggested that we should use activity-based costing to first be run to get a better picture of a true manufacturing cost. And what Martin was able to provide is he was able to segregate the $4.8 million, which is the total estimated overhead, and he was able to determine how much of that overhead relates to different activities. So they've got soldering, shipping, quality control, purchase, machinery, and they also have a cost driver. So each of these activities has a cost driver, which is what we saw in the lecture notes, right? In the notes that the technical notes for ABC. So remember we said this is the activity, the cost of the activity. So these are the activity. These are the cost per activity. And we need to be able to figure out the driver. And how do we determine the driver? It would be these. So these 4 boxes would be these ones here. And these will be the driver. And normally the question will give you the drivers. Now, they also were able to accumulate the number of activities or the number of usage per activity. So, for example, for machining, there was 176,000, probably machine hours, because that's the driver, and Regal only uses 16,000 machine hours. Okay? machine setup, it looks like, so if I was to highlight, it looks like that Monarch consumes quite a lot of soldering, okay, and quite a lot of machining. Okay, so I'm just trying to compare the two. And purchase order, Regal has quite a huge consumption of that. Okay, and shipment. So again, the greatest part about ABC is that it allows us to really look at what activities, where do we spend our time, and then this allows management to start determining whether these activities are value add to the product, to the customer's experience. So that's the one reasons why we actually need activity-based costing. It allows us to better manage our time, our effort, make sure that what we do is value add. And secondly, it allows us to perhaps look for ways to try to minimize these costs. And by knowing how much it costs us to do that particular activity will allow us to perhaps do some sort of outsourcing opportunities. So for example, we could probably, if it's costing us $860,000 for shipment, and that includes folks in the back of the warehouse packaging and shipping the product, we might want to hire perhaps an outsourcing company to do that. Now, if you also look at the fact that it's costing us $1.24 million for quality control, that may again be an opportunity for us to determine whether we could build and design the product better so that it minimizes the quality control issues surrounding the product. Okay, so that's the positive part about ABC, is allows us to then rationalize the cost and investigate where there's opportunities. Now, it says selling and admin are $265 for Monarch and $265 per unit and $244 for Regal. Now, we're asked to do the following. We're asked to calculate the manufacturing overhead costs for both Monarch and Regal under both methods, and we need to explain the difference. And then we're going to calculate the operating profit in Part C for both Monarch and Regal, for both the traditional and ABC. And then we're asked perhaps our opinion on whether we should concentrate our marketing efforts to Monarch or all to Regal, and explain how ABC affects your recommendation. So let's take a look at this question. So the first part's asking us to calculate using traditional costing. So I'm going to short form manufacturing overhead as MOH. Under the traditional is we're going to take the estimated overhead of $4.8 million, and remember we're using machine hours. And machine hours, okay, now we have been given the machine hours, right? It's 192. But let's pretend we don't have this data, because obviously the way it would work from a traditional perspective is you wouldn't have tracked the number of machine hours used. But we do know that for Monarch, it takes us 8 hours. So we're told that Monarch is 8 hours, machine hours, times 22,000 units. Okay, that's 176 machine hours. And for Regal, we know it's 4 hours times 4,000 units. So this is machine hours per unit, and this is number of units. Okay? And that gives us 192. So the MOH per unit under traditional is 4.8 million divided by 192 machine hours gives us $25 per machine hour. Okay? That makes sense? Now, let's look at the traditional cost that's going to be for each of the products. So Monarch and Regal. So direct material, that's given to us, right? 208 and 548. Okay? And that was given to us here. Now, direct labor, we know it's 1.5 direct labor hours times $12. That's 18. And for Regal, that would be 3.5 hours direct labor hours times 12. Okay, so I'm just going to perhaps separate this out here. I'm just going to do this. Okay, so I'll just do this, make it look a little bit easier to see. Now, next is machine usage. Now we're told that the machine is $8. It's 8 hours, sorry. And we're told that the machine usage is $18 per hour. That was given to us, right? So it's 8 machine hours times 18. And this one is 4 machine hours times 18 to give us 72. Now, under the ABC, these three would be the same because those are direct. Direct costs can be easily traced to a particular cost object, Monarch and Regal. So we know that in that case this would be direct. But for the MOH, this is where we use the traditional costing. We're going to take 25, so 8 machine hours times 25 give us $200. And this is 4 machine hours. Gives me $100. So altogether, this is $570 and this is $798. Okay? Now, the Monarch is sold for $900 and the Regal is sold for $1,140. We're going to take a look at the profitability in a minute, but that answers the first part. Just calculate the manufacturing cost for Monarch and Regal under traditional costing. Now we're going to look at the ABC. ABC. So let me flip to the next page. Now under the ABC, so MOH under ABC, we need to first calculate. So step 1, calculate the allocation rate for each activities. So how do I do that? Well, let's start with listing all the activities here. So soldering, shipment, quality control, so let's put down QC, purchase order, PO, machine, power, and machine setup. So I'll just call it MS and MP, just for short. Okay? And I'm going to put SHIP for short, SOLD for short. Okay? Just I want to make sure that we can short form this. Now, we're going to take a look at the cost of each activity. Now, notice the cost is adding up to the same 4.8 traditional. And we're going to divide it by the number of activities or number of events. Okay? And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take 942 divided by 1,570. That gives us 60 cents per solder joint. Next, take 860 divided by 20,000 shipment, gives me $43 per shipment. Quality control, I got 1,240,000 divided by 77,500 units inspected, gives me $16 per inspection. For purchased order, we have 400 divided by 190,800 purchased orders. That gives me $5 per PO, purchased order. So it's a simple mathematical calculation. So this is the step where we need to calculate the cost per activity. We need to determine the cost per activity. Okay, so let's finish this. I've got 57,600 divided by 192,000 machine hours. Gives me 30 cents per machine hour. And this one is 750 divided by 30,000 setup, gives me $25 per setup. Now, what's the next step? The next step is we're going to use these and we're going to calculate the manufacturing overhead that's attributable to Monarch and Regal. So we're going to do that next. Okay, so how do we do that? So let me break up this into the quadrants just to make it life easier. Okay. And we're going to put Monarch here, Regal, and the various manufacturing overhead right here. The first one is soldering. And we know from Monarch it's 1,185 times the unit, the cost per unit, right? Times 60 cents. That's what we're going to do. And the next one is you've got Regal 385 times 60 cents. That's exactly what we're going to do. Next is shipment. And it's 16,200 shipment times $43. Okay, now how did I get those numbers again? So let me remind you what we've done. The shipment, 16,200 for Monarch times $43 per shipment. That's how much we calculated. And for Regal, it's 3,800 times 43. Okay? So quality control, QC, Again, the same idea, okay? Purchase order, 80,100 POs times $5. Next is machine power. Okay. With the commas in. All right, next and finally, machine setup. Oh, sorry, this is $25. So that's the amount of the overhead that's going to be allocated to Monarch and Regal. Now if you add these two, you get 3,160,100 plus 1,639,900. It should add to the 4.8 million, which is the total overhead. So now we're going to allocate by the number of units, right? So the MOH per unit, we know that there's 22,000 units. We get $143.64 per unit. And this one is 4,000 units. And that gives us $409.98 per unit. Now, if you go back to what we did for traditional costing, what was the amount of overhead that we've allocated? Okay, we allocated 200 to Monarch and 100 to Regal. So remember that when we did this traditional, we allocated 200 as opposed to 143 and 100 as opposed to 409. Okay, so it looks like we're allocating more to Monarch and less to Regal, making Regal's profit look a lot better than it actually is. Now let's add the direct material. And let's add direct labor. And these would all be the same, right? And machine, right? That gives me 513 and 1,107.98. Okay, so let me just fix up this so that's the that's the piece of manufacturing overhead, and now we've got the MOH per unit. So you'll see that that's the cost, right? This is the total cost. Now let's compare that to Monarch and Regal. So take a look. This is traditional that we saw in the previous. This is the activity base. And you'll see that it's looking like we think we're making way more money than on Regal, and that's the reason why management wants to keep Regal, get rid of Monarch, but in fact, if you look at the activity, we're not making as much of a profit. Remember, we're selling this at 1,140, so it's really almost close to break even. Whereas for the Monarch, we're selling it for 900, and we're still, in fact, we're making more profit. Okay? And by the way, these are the same as traditional. So these are the same information, the cost, as traditional. Because direct cost should be the same irrespective whether we use activity-based costing or not. And this is the MOH per unit. So let me just fix this up. That's the MOH per unit. And then you add it to that to get to the 5453. Okay? So let's answer the rest of the questions. As part B asked us, explain the difference in the manufacturing we just did. Okay? And part C says, what is the operating profit? So the operating profit and again I'm going to use the two columns, Monarch and Regal. Under traditional, the profit is selling price is 900. This is 1,140. Okay, the cost to manufacture, and that was, we saw that to be 570. Remember, 570 and 798 in part A. And what about SG&A, selling, general, and admin? We were told that in the question, weren't we? We're told that it's 265 and 244.60. So this is making $65. This is making $97.40. Now, using ABC, what do we see? Okay, using ABC, I get selling price should be the same. Cost to manufacturer is the ABC, and we saw that, right, to be 513, 64, and 1107.98. And SG&A should be the same. And you'll see that Monarch makes $121 profit, but Regal has a loss. So, to me, it would have been the wrong decision. Remember, they wanted to eliminate. They wanted to eliminate or phase out the Monarch, and in fact that would have led to the wrong decision, because had they done that, they would have realized over time that they were losing money. They're not able to sustain their operations. Okay, so that's the question. Now the part D says, should Applewood concentrate its marketing effort on Monarch or Legal? Well, we could see that under the ABC, much more better reflective of the true cost, because that's the cost of I guess, utilizing the resources. Regal has utilized a lot of the resources here. And you can see that it's much higher than what we thought from a traditional perspective. So the MOH of 4.8 million, a lot of that is being consumed by Regal, and therefore it would have led the wrong decision. So the power of ABC allows us to rationalize the cost, allows us to better understand, and maybe, and perhaps maybe we need to price the Regal product a little bit higher. But obviously pricing is another issue because it's often driven by not only cost but also your competitors. Okay? Thank you so much.